And the scary thing is when you do get to this age, is that there is a kind of trajectory that you start seeing with mates of yours from back in the day in terms of their fidelity and faithfulness to Jesus. So I'm sure you're the same. It's like, man, there were a crew of us back in the day that were red hot for Jesus and had turned up to Bible college. And there's a bunch of that crew that have cooled down so much they don't worship in a church today. Right? Have you guys got... I mean, that's weird that they went to Bible college, and there's quite a cool down. But I'm sure that you guys are the same, right? And I don't want that for you. I don't want that to be my story. I want to have a long obedience in the same direction as Eugene Peterson talked about. There's an interesting book called The Great Dechurching that explored the shocking reality that over the last 30 years in America, 40 million people have left the church. So get your head, it's insane, the numbers. And I know it's in America, but it's, there's some translatable ideas in terms of a Western context here in New Zealand. And so in this book, they did research as to what was going on there. And here's what they discovered. Of that 40 million, 10 million of those people had left the church because of what they call casualties. So these people have gone through a horrible experience in church. A leader had failed them. They'd been hurt by church dynamics or whatever, and they left because of that. Now, there are people in this church who have gone through enormous pain and tough experiences in church. I just want to honour you for being here. I know that it's trust. I know that you're on a healing journey. Just God bless you. Because there is a way of navigating the disappointments of church in a way that doesn't see you have to leave it. And I know what church can do to people. I've experienced, I think, most of it. But so then you've got that. So 1 in 4 leave because they're casualties. 3 out of 4 leave, and what they're called just casuals. They're not casualties, they're just casuals. My friend Dan Sheed's written a book that I got to read, which inspired this moment, called Drift No More, that's coming out later this year. It's going to be a must-read. It's great, just really amazing. And this is what he says in it. He says, 3/4 of these people, 30 million, the authors call casuals, have exited not through a particularly painful catalytic event, but by slow disappearance. They moved cities and never found a new community in which to worship. They found other things to do with their money and time. They found church inconvenient to their schedules. Phones replaced prayer time. Socialising with friends on Sunday mornings for brunch replaced regular Sunday attendance. Busy work schedules replaced commitment to a small group. Netflix replaced Bible reading at home. Isolation replaced community. The sad point of the research is that 30 million Christians simply drifted away. And the authors comment in this book, the casuals didn't intend to leave. They simply let the secular vision of life overtake their Christian one. And so I just don't want that to be your experience. I don't want that to be my story. I want to be faithful to Jesus, keep saying yes to him. I want to keep finding the life that's found in him. And I want to be a great example of what it looks like when you're deeply committed to Jesus, what he can do to you in terms of sanctification. I really do. I want that to be your story. Now, what I want to explore this morning is a concept that we've explored in the past, but this is a number of years ago now. And I think it's really helpful for people that have grown up in an evangelical church to have an understanding of kind of the journey of faith that you'll most likely kind of go along. Because I think for most of us from charismatic evangelical type churches, we've got something of a grasp of what the Christian journey looks like, but there's been some deficiencies in terms of understanding the journey. And so when we go through things that don't kind of fit with our paradigm, it can be easy to drift away. And it can be easy to lose that fire for Jesus. I love that we're fired up when we come to faith, but I want to be fired up when I die and see him face to face one day. I want to live a life of passion, hence the sabbatical and all the rest of it. We do these things to steward our passion for Jesus and our love for him and his presence in our life. And so what we're going to be looking at, next slide, Joel, is some stuff from this book called The Critical Journey, Stages in the Life of Faith by Janet and by Robert here. I've read this book. It's brilliant. I would encourage you to read it if you're a nerd and into that thing. But also like John Mark Comer and Pete Scazzero and a lot of others that have been really helpful in my journey have drawn a lot from this. And again, I've just found it incredibly helpful. Now, what they're going to talk about, what we're going to talk about today is this kind of like, I don't want you to hear this like a linear journey where it's like you do this and then you wind up this. It's messy. Next slide. Like, right? This is how we expect the journey to be, but this is the reality of the journey, is it's squiggly and messy and all over the map. How many of us have like leant into a spiritual discipline, smashed it for a couple of months and then got wobbly again? Welcome to humanity. Welcome to my experience. Welcome to but you just don't give up with Jesus. That's the secret sauce, right? Stuff I'm going to dust myself off and give it another crack. This practicing the way course is another on-ramp for you to say, I want to put Jesus at the center. And I want to learn his way that leads to life. So this is the kind of, but this has so resonated with me, and I've seen this play out as a pastor now for 21 years. I've seen this play out over and over and over again to know that the guts of this framework are really helpful in terms of our journey with Jesus, okay? So this is what they would unpack in terms of the stages of faith that we go through. Next slide, Joel. So this is what we're going to be looking through. Some of you guys were familiar with this because we looked at this a number of years ago, but let's unpack it. Firstly, the first stage that we go through, and everyone goes through this, you can't argue with this one, is just recognition of God. Matthew 4, 21 to 23, Jesus calls James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, and they were preparing their nets, and immediately they left their boat and their father and followed him. Like there's this moment of like, oh, Jesus intersects your life. And this is where next slide. This is where we all begin our journey of faith. Someone bigger than us really exists and he truly loves us. This may occur in childhood. This is the author, by the way, not me. This may occur in childhood or later in life as adults. For some people, this is a very identifiable experience, a moment in time where everything changes. For others, there's a gradual realization with no certainty as to where or when the experience began. Either way, we simply know that God is there. Factors contributing to this experience can either be a sense of awe or a sense of need in our life. Now, this is, again, something I've just seen happen over and over again. Whether it's, now you could be 3 years old and you have this moment of like, oh, God's real. Or you could be 55 years old and reading C.S. Lewis and you're like, oh, he's real. Like Russell Brand's going through this right now. Reads Mere Christianity and like his whole world gets turned upside down and comes to very genuine faith by the looks of things. And I like this oral need, right? How many of us, it was one of those two things. For me, it was awe. I was at a camp. God walked in the room in inverted commas. Wowza, he's real. I'm in. Other people, it's need. You hit rock bottom. Your life is a mess. Things are a shambles. You cry out to something and love walks in the room. And it's like, oh, he's there. He's with us. And so this is a beautiful stage. And just to be clear, this is not there is a higher power out there. This is the revelation that Jesus is who he says he is. This is that his claims to be God, his miraculous power, his rising from the dead, his forgiving sins, these are true. It's like this revelation. Oh, this is real. And so we move on to stage 2, the life of discipleship, if we do 2 things. First, we commit to following Jesus, not some ambiguous higher power. And secondly, we join a community of faith. That's how you start moving on in terms of your discipleship journey. Now, this is no small thing. I've seen so many times people make decisions in this very room that for whatever reason they come into the kingdom, but they don't make the next step into church. And I've never seen anyone flourish in their faith outside of a faith environment, because this is actually God's agenda for our transformation and for our journey with him. Is that we're part of a community. We learn how to love. We learn how to follow him in this context, right? So I want to just bless those of you that have moved from the kingdom to the church and got some roots down here. You friggin' legends. This is going to help you on your journey. And when people come to faith in this church, I want us as a community to be responsible for saying to those folks, we don't care whether it's here or the church down the road, but get into fellowship. Get into a church and go there every week. That'll see you grow in your walk with Jesus, and you'll find life every step of the way. So we move into stage 2, the life of discipleship. Philippians 4 verse 9, Paul says, whatever you've learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. So this stage is about learning and belonging. We begin to learn and explore and absorb and put into place our set of beliefs and faith. This is where the people that are teachers in your life are very important, because they kind of set the default for your faith. So it's interesting being a pastor now for many years. People will join my church from other churches, and they've grown up in different traditions, and there's a whole lot of stuff that's helpful, and there's some stuff sometimes that's not that helpful in terms of the default stuff that was there for when you came to faith. Sometimes we have to do some unlearning down the track. So the voices in your life in this particular moment are really important. But you don't know. You don't know whether they're good voices or not. If you get deep into the health, wealth, and prosperity doctrine of the early days because, you're watching TBN and that's how you got saved, then that's going to prove tricky down the track. We're going to have to work through some of that. You've got to wrestle with some of this stuff. The stage is best characterized by a time of learning and belonging. At this stage, we learn the most about God as perceived by others that we respect and trust. We are learners, not the teachers. And so this is where we want to get our pomp. Now, I want to say on all of these stages, you never graduate past them. So, and also it's not like there's a competition this morning to go, again, the pride in us, like, I hope I'm level 4, or stage whatever. It's like, don't worry, whatever, if there's a stage that really resonates, this is where God's got you, and go for it. And on this stage, I'm like, go for it. Read the books, listen to the podcast, and never graduate past that. Let's be lifelong learners that just are wrestling with and reading and listening to things and what does it look like to follow Jesus and to be his disciple? # practicing the way course, get amongst it. We start to identify gifts and bless others. It's fun. The danger here is that we can get stuck in black and white thinking. So in our immaturity, sometimes it can be like we get really frothed on a particular teacher or way or perspective, and then everyone else is wrong. And that's again the danger there, because you get super frothed and excited about what you're discovering, and anyone else that's not sharing that froth is just a bit of a muppet, right? And it's like, so there's that. So then we move on to the next stage, which is the productive life. And this is a stage, so stage 1, 2, and 3, I'm like, these are the stages you guys will know. Most of our church is in one of these stages. And you can get your head around it. You're like, this is cool. This productive life stage is the doing stage of our life. It's where we find ourselves most consciously working in service, in the service for God. It's time to give and return for all that we've received. It's a very active stage of our journey. It's positive, it's dynamic, it's centered on being productive in the area of our faith. It nourishes us because it's so personally rewarding. It operates on goals and achievement and building and creating, which can be exciting, fulfilling, inspiring, and fruitful. We feel unique within our community. We take on extra responsibility. We feel a degree of confidence because of our experience. And so this is a stage that kind of evolves where it's like, man, I want to give myself to this thing. Pastors love this stage. Again, may you never graduate past this stage. May we always just be like, I want to contribute to this thing. I want to give myself to it. And it's exciting. It can be tiring, but it's fun. We serve in church. We serve in different places. Matthew 10 is kind of this stage of faith for the disciples where he sends them out. Go out as workers into the harvest field. Now, the interesting thing, though, is that the productive stage of our life, there's some dangers around this phase that we have to be mindful of, because most of us don't want to be moved from this particular stage in our life. Instead, we're going to be moved by things that start to happen to us that we have to make sense of in the context of our faith journey, which we'll explore in a second. But most of us would like to park here. But here's my observation, is that the productive life, which our culture absolutely gets its pom-poms out for, the danger is that after a while, if you stay in the stage of faith, is that you will get bored in church. Your faith will, like I've just seen this so many times where people come to faith, get super excited, then very teachable spirit, learning, hungry, want to grow, and then again, this is exciting, let's go, let's serve it. If you just stay here, eventually you will get bored because your inner life is not strong enough. And your whole, your spirituality is caught up in this external production stuff without digging the deeper wells. And so what I've seen happen here is that people start channeling that productivity rather than building the things of the kingdom. They just start grabbing the secular vision of the good life and start being super productive down that road, and then just get lost in that space, which is empty. There's nothing wrong with our careers and with our jobs and our vocations. Don't hear me try and have some dualistic thing here. I've done a whole sermon on the theology of work. It's super important. But we can be run by ambition rather than obedience. And we can put our own desires in the place of God and call it God's will for us. We can live by performance, right? Even if it's sometimes performance in the kingdom of God. And so we've got to be careful that we have a vision for success that's congruent with Jesus' vision of success rather than the world's vision of success. What does it look like to flourish? And so I've just seen this particular stage here, and this is why I wanted to preach this Sunday for our church, as I've just seen this be an off-ramp for people. And I don't want that for you. I don't want that for you. The productive life is awesome, but Jesus is so clever. Have you noticed that? Very clever. And he's always like, let's go a little deeper. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that he's like, oh, you've said yes to me? That's awesome. Come follow me again a little bit deeper. Another yes. Another yes. Another little yes. Another big yes. He's always asking us to sink deeper into our yes. And so God invites us to be a deep people who live in a life in loving union with Him and selfless love for others, who live lives of wonder and delight. How does He do that? Well, there's an invitation to surrender afresh. Next slide. I'll keep going, it's right. This stage, here we go. This stage, the journey inward, this stage is a deep and very personal inward journey. It almost always comes as an unsettling experience, yet results in healing for those who continue through it. Until now, our journey has had a very external dimension to it. The community of faith, serving with our gifts, leading others in productivity. Upon entering this stage, many people experience a period of questioning, exploring, doubting, even uncertainty. This can be caused by a life or faith crisis. For the first time, our faith does not seem to work the same as it has before, and our answers seem inadequate, leaving us feeling quite vulnerable. Some people refuse to engage fully with this stage, and so then they come into this place of questioning, falling apart, doubting, and again, it can be an off-ramp. But this, I just want to say, this is a normal stage of faith. And some of you are just feeling so relieved right now as I read that out, because you're like, well, this is so common that like people have wrote books about this stage of faith and what. Yes, this is normal when we go through things, to wrestle with doubts. But again, there's like this deeper inner journey that starts happening where you have to work through how your family has shaped you for good and for bad. Where you start working through mother or father wounds that we all have to some degree. And our kids, as much as we want to be the best parents ever, are going to have to work through some of those things themselves in time. Like you've got to go through the deeper, we start working through those moments of pain or trauma. As you kind of go through that deeper inner journey, sometimes, not always, your outer world can look okay. But your inner world's a bit of a mess. You lack clarity and direction. You're dealing with that deep stuff of healing from that, family hurt maybe, or living out of a false self. And if you do this wisely, it'll be an introspective time. It'll normally involve prayer, silence and solitude, journaling, where you do go to that deeper place. where you work through your healing from the past, where you process your present reality, and as you do that, you receive new hopes and dreams for the future. Now, as we go through that journey inward, sometimes at this stage, we hit what the writers in this book call the wall. Now, the wall, sometimes the wall causes that journey inward, or sometimes it comes as a result of the journey. But what the wall is where we hit something where it's like a pain that we can't get around. You just can't get around this. It could be a death of someone you love, a diagnosis in your body, a divorce, some sort of failure where you just can't sweep it under the rug, a hurt or wounding in a church experience, a failure of a business venture, the impact of your choices when you were younger. Like you just can't erase it, you can't get around it, you can't manipulate it, you can't spin it. Something enters into your life that you can't ignore. And the only way out is through. So in this time, there's a danger because when you hit the wall, can you go back a slide? Sorry, we're not there yet. When you hit the wall, you just want to anesthetize your pain, right? It's like, this is the worst. And you want to anesthetize your pain. Now, let's all just share with your neighbour about what your most favourite anaesthetic is in terms of your drug of choice. Shall we just share that? No, that's not. But you know, all the things. We all know the things. It can look like just Netflix binging. It can getting, through to pornography and alcohol and drugs. I mean, there's 1,000,001 ways that we choose to anaesthetize our pain. But, oh my gosh, people are actually sharing. But here's the thing with the wall. Those things may work for smaller pain. They don't work with the wall. It's too big. You can't anesthetize the pain of the wall. This is why you've got to understand, the wall is not someone yelled at you at work. The wall is so significant, the only way out is through. You've got to work through your grief. You've got to work through that loss. You've got to work through that pain. You don't get around your grief, you get through your grief work. And so this is, if you're, the reason I wanted to preach this pastorally is because I know many of us are in this kind of phase of a combination of the productive life, but heaps of us are in the journey inward and are banging against walls. Like when I've been praying about this Sunday, it was like the pastoral ache I was feeling for many of us because I'm having lots of conversations here. And if we don't navigate this wisely, it's a massive off-ramp. Many Christians do not know how to navigate this time well and project onto God a character that is not true of his nature, and they confuse God and life. Life is tough, and everyone goes through the stuff. He is good, and he's worthy of our trust through it. And so, if you're going through this, I'm sorry, it's real. I know it's really hard. I know it's really, really hard, but God's deepest work often happens in this time. And my job as your pastor is to create a culture that makes it easy for you to be transformed from glory to glory to become like him. My role is to be in the pains of childbirth until Christ is formed in you. That is the whole gig here, is that we are deeply committed to being devoted to Jesus and letting him transform us so that we can become like him. And I'm sorry, but one of the most tricky phases is this phase, but it's also the most transforming if we walk with wisdom through it, if we let him in through the midst of it. John Mark Comer says here, the invitation in this moment is to humbly accept that we are ready to learn about true freedom, to the liberty to live without grasping. In a more profound sense than ever before, we have to let God be God and let him direct our lives. It's interesting that Fraser was pointing to Peter. We hadn't swapped notes, but this is what God does all the time in terms of themes. And so Fraser was talking about in his communion reflection, Peter's failure and how Jesus comes along and redeems him. And then he's the one that gets to tell everyone about Jesus on the day of Pentecost. Beautiful story of redemption, right? But that moment of redemption happens in John 21. And this is what the Bible says here. When they'd finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" So these are like, he's pointing to the fish. It's like, do you love these more than me? Like the career outside of deep devotion to me. For Peter, who's got a call of vocational ministry in his life. And he's like, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Feed my lambs. Care for my people," is what Jesus is saying. Says it 3 times to heal the denial. Isn't that beautiful? Says it 3 times, heals the denial. But then Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, "Do you love me?" Isn't it interesting that Peter is hurt in the healing process? Have you noticed that? It's like this, it's painful when Jesus starts putting his finger on stuff in your life that's deeply broken. It can feel like hurt. And then he said, "Lord, you know all things, you know that I love you." And then Jesus said, feed my sheep. Listen to this. "Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." So this is where Jesus is talking, again in the stages of faith, about this movement from childhood, where you have control, to an elderly life where someone else dresses you and leads you where you don't want to go. But it's also a nod to the upside-down crucifix that Peter experienced at the end of his life. But Jesus is pointing out that someone else is in charge of your journey and your spiritual formation, and his name is Jesus. Jesus is the one leading, and we are the sheep. And so, next slide, we can move on to the next stage. Can you go to the next one? We move on to the next stage, the journey outward. Listen to this. When we accept the reality of our lives with joy, right? This is one of the this sounds easy, this is one of the hardest things you will ever have to do, is to accept your reality with joy. It's very tricky. Scott Peck said, "Mental health is a dedication to reality at all costs." So, right, mental health gone wrong is when we lose touch with reality. And you can see extremes of that in our inner city at times. Mental health is a dedication to reality at all costs. And so when you accept your life with joy, you can start moving forward into these next stages of faith. This is my body. This is my story. This is my wound and my failure. This is what I've done. This is what I haven't done. This is what's been done to me. This is my marriage. This is my singleness. This is my gifting. This is not. It's the hardest thing you'll ever have to do, but it's also the most liberating. Healing, this is the most liberating, healing, and life-giving things we will ever do with Jesus, is that we take that inner journey, we invite Jesus into it, we hug the cactus with Jesus. Some of you guys are like, new people to our church, I have no context for that. We embrace that most painful part of ourselves with Jesus and let him speak his words of life, healing, truth. You've got to go back there. It's not fun. I'm back in therapy at the moment. You know, it's like you hug the cactus with Jesus, and it helps you accept the reality of your life with joy. It's one of the most healing, liberating things that you can ever do. And this morning, I'm going to pray that the Holy Spirit fills each one of you with the courage, for those that need it, to do that journey. It is so good. Here's the danger of this particular stage. The danger here, we can get stuck when we tip into a level of introspection that becomes narcissism, or we almost indulge it and we get stuck there and it almost becomes our identity. We can get stuck here if we deconstruct but then don't move forward. It's actually not meant to be deconstruction. It's meant to be a very careful renovation of your faith that sees it more healthy and holy. We can get stuck by being self-centered. Because here's my experience, that as you go through this, you can still live a productive life of blessing for others. We are always called to live a life of love. And so I've had to take many of this journey in the midst of a servant-hearted job as a pastor, where it's not about me, my week's about serving this community and serving others. You don't feel like it sometimes when you're going through this stuff because you have low emotional energy. Like just it takes it out of you going through this stuff. But you have to steward that energy wisely, and you have to be careful that you don't become very self-centered during this phase. So you just got to pick what you do, but do something that's there to bless others. Do something to care for others. Don't make it just about you and your whole world about you, right? It's a danger that we can get a bit narcissistic in some of that stuff and indulge in some self-centeredness. So that's some of the dangers there. Is this resonating for anyone in terms of your own life experience? I hope this is helpful. Because now we're going to start, why would you go through all of that? What's the point? Here we go. Now it gets good. Let's get some vision in our bones as to why we want to keep following Jesus. Let's just come out of the valley, right? In Jesus' name. Journey outward, stage 5 here. I love this. Once parts of the deep, excruciating inward journey have been experienced, the natural outcome is to venture outside of one's self-centeredness and back into the active world with a new sense of fulfillment. This is the outward journey, a venture outside of our self-interests to others, based on the growth and the peace of mind we have experienced from the inner journey. The outward venture may or may not be different from our previous direction, but our focus is different. Our focus is outward, but from a new grounded center of ourselves. Once again, we've been changed. We have experienced a new wholeness. We are aware of our faults. We have a fresh desire to be in God's will rather than our own. We are surrendering to a much wiser, more vital spirit. We sense a looser grip on ourselves and a willingness to be conduits for God's work in our lives and others' lives. We endure suffering gracefully because our confidence is in God. You meet these sort of people, and there are people in our church like this, and there is just a calmness, there's a centeredness, they know who they are, they're filled with peace, filled with joy. And growth in this stage mostly looks like resting, accepting our wounds that are part of our story, rather than working and fighting. And I just want to honor Luke, because last week, this dude modeled this brilliantly. I was just yeah, come on. His willingness to be vulnerable about his wrestles even to this day, but it's just coming from this place of peace and security about who God is and who Luke is in the eyes of God. You could feel it. God in his sovereignty orchestrated us to have these kind of, sermons. If you haven't listened to Luke's, please do from last week. It was absolutely exceptional. But I was like, oh man, I'm experiencing someone that's done this work, and I've been friends with Luke for ages, and I know he's done the mahi in the secret place in terms of their inner journey. And so it's fascinating because when people hit this stage, it's very rare for people to get stuck or to regress or backslide or to drift off once they've started to go and get the roots down like they have when you start coming into this space of stage 5 where there's this journey outward. And it's beautiful because actually when you do that work, you wind up getting frothed on Jesus, hard out. And it's interesting because you step into what I would call a second naivety. There's a whole lot of writing around this idea. A second naivety. And this is the idea that when you come to faith, there's just a naivety and it's beautiful. So back in my day, Ron Canoli was the worship leader of choice for me, right? Some of you guys don't know who that is. Shame on you. That's a failure on my part to disciple you. But Ron Canoli, and so I would just thrash Ron Canoli in my teenage years and Kevin Prosh and a few others. They were just my soul would soar. And then Kevin Prosh, who was one of my favorites, fell over morally, and then you go through all church hurt and all stuff and do all the journey and stuff, and it's all a bit blah, blah, blah. You go through all that stuff. You keep hanging in there long enough, you'll get frothed on Ron Canoli and Kevin Prosh again. But it's kind of got this wisdom underneath it because you've gone through all the things, but you're still moved to your core at Jesus, who Jesus is. And you just love him and you adore him.
And then this is the absolute goal for all of our life. And as I say, this is not linear. This is all over the map. And some of us are in the midst of a whole lot of these stages all at once. And that's normal. But the goal for any person deeply committed to following Jesus is that we would lead a life of love. Amen. Come on, right? That has to be the vision in our hearts. Is that in the very short life that we have, that we would lead a life of love. Do you know your great-great-great-grandparents' names? You are going to be forgotten in a few generations. Be encouraged. So in the short life that we have, why don't we just shoot for living a life of love? Why don't we make that the absolute telos, the goal, the thing in our hearts? To do the Practicing the Way course is a simple expression of that desire. To have the humility to learn what it looks like in an ongoing way to be a disciple of Jesus. Because I want to live a life of love, and that's only found when we follow the way of Jesus. So what are the scriptures around living a life of love? There's too many to count. Literally, like 1 John and 2 John are just these epistles filled, dripping with someone who's so let Jesus into their hearts that they just gush about the love of God the whole time. Just read 1 John and 2 John if you want to get some stuff in your heads around that. At this stage now, I've got to definitely quote from the book because I'm nowhere near here. So let's just read what the authors have to say. At this stage, we reflect God to others in the world more clearly and consistently than we ever thought possible. We let our lights shine in such a way that God is given the credit and the thanks. We are at peace with ourselves, fully conscious of being the person God has created us to be. We have little ambition for being well-known, rich, successful, noteworthy. We're just like vessels into which God pours his spirit, constantly overflowing. We are spirit-filled, but in a quiet, unassuming way. Just the best of childhood wonder and wisdom of old age all in one place. We just become people of love. Not the love of our culture, which is like tolerate everyone, do what you want with your body, be nice to people. But the love of Jesus revealed on the cross, right? The decision of the heart to put the good of the other ahead of yourself out of sheer delight and compassion. I'll say that again. The decision of the heart to put the good of the other ahead of the good of yourself out of sheer delight and compassion. Oh, aren't they the best people? Aren't they the best people you've ever met, who just make you feel like $1,000,000, who are just so present to you, engaged with you? And you know, as I speak this, I just know you ache to be this because you are wired in the image of a God. Who is this? You're made in the image of this God. And so there's something in you that longs to be this person because this is who you are. And I want to just say, after being in the game for so long, that this isn't a pipe dream. This can be your story. The decisions you make in those different stages of faith are very, very important because if you walk the way of Jesus through all these different stages, you will become a person of love. You will. But in the same way, if you choose not to, you will become somebody who's embittered, who's unforgiving. You know, when you walk away from hanging out with the person, you were like, man, they were not the warmest log on the social fire tonight. Sheegas, that's probably been me a whole lot, actually. It's like, we're like, mate, and we can be aware of our own shortcomings and all of that, but I just have seen people who have just said yes to Jesus, and I can just see that they're tracking in the right direction, and I've been around the block long enough now to watch a couple of decades' work of formation from our culture deform people as they have just hardened their hearts to the way of Jesus. And it's really sad because I'm like, man, you're turning into someone that, I just don't know if that's God's best for you, for who you are. And so just next slide, there's a couple of people that I think we're going to have people in our imagination that were like, they were a person who was stage 6, baby. I want some stage 6 heroes in my life. And Eugene, now you've got to contextualize this. These are a bunch of white guys with beards. Well, no, my grandfather didn't have one, but, you've got to contextualize and all the rest of it. For me, there's a couple of people that are in my imagination that I want to be like when I grow up. One of them is Eugene Peterson, who has mentored me for many years, even though I've never met him. I've read all his stuff, watched all his videos, and I'm so moved. And I know people that knew him, and just like people left hanging out with him, just like, whoa, holy ground. Like just carried the presence of God in the most incredible, again, Life of Love, stage 6, and all the rest of it. The person who I knew who lived this was my grandfather, Bruce Huff, who is just one of my heroes. He passed away probably about 15 years ago now. But as I read this book and as I got to know my grandfather's story, I was like, oh man, he just kept saying yes to Jesus, even though his wife took her life after suffering from postnatal depression, even though he went through World War II, all those sorts of things. Like he went through the wall, he went through all the things. Andy, there's a bunch of people here that met him, and it's like just a godly man. And I hung out with him, and it was like the closest to hanging out with Jesus I would get on this side of eternity in terms of just what he carried. And I've said this before, but at my 40th birthday, the highest compliment Jen has ever given me, in her little talk at my 40th birthday, she said, Sam, I know that one of your heroes is Bruce, and that you long to be him. Like him one day. I just want to say that I reckon you're tracking in the right direction. Highest compliment she's ever given me. Because I want that to be my story. I want my grandchildren bragging about Sam Harvey and how much like Jesus he became, particularly as he got older. Outwardly, we're always going to be wasting away, but inwardly, we can be renewed day by day to become more like him. Next. But I just want to say this: none of us mature without aging, but lots of people can age without maturing. So, stage 1 humbles us. Stage 2 grounds us. Stage 3 rewards and exalts us. Stage 4 unsettles us. The wall unmasks us. Stage 5 transforms us, and stage 6 transcends us. And so this morning, you'll be able to resonate with these different stages. Can I say, there's a bunch of you in stage 1 and 2, don't rush it. It's not a competition to see who can bang through all this stuff. Let God do it in his timing and enjoy the stage that you're in. But especially because I'm aware a lot of people are on the stage 4 wall phase, I wanted to give you a vision for what's on the other side and say, make good choices in this particular moment. Go to the counseling, do the journaling, don't run from your pain, don't stay too busy that you can't face it, all those sorts. Make wise decisions to work through the deeper inner work and through the wall and whatever that may look like so that you can live a life of love long term. Like there is, as Ronald Rolheiser says, there is a conspiracy between God and nature to mellow the soul. And many of us are experiencing that. And so the question that I have today as we come into land is, what does it look like for you to respond to God's invitation in the stage that you're in right now? And this is an important moment for us. I want us as a community to take a step back from just living our day-to-day lives and just reflect on where we're at. What's God doing at the moment? You know, Tony Campolo interviewed a whole bunch of people in the 80s and 90s back in the day and said, if you were to live life again, what would you do differently? A whole bunch of things they said, and it came through, there was 2 or 3 things over and over and over again. One of them was, I would reflect more. This is a moment just to say, where are you at? But as I've been praying about what we're going to do now, which is just to spend some time just praying for each other, here's what I think at the guts of there's an intersection that happens at all these different stages, and at the heart of it is the question, do you trust God? Do you trust him? Do you trust him? That's at the gut. It's not, do you trust the church or do you trust him and the journey that he's got you on and is leading you on? And it's interesting, I finish with this. In Romans 15, it says this, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him. so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. Like as we choose to trust in him in the different spaces that we're in, there's this little deep thing of like, do I trust you to respond to the prayer ministry, to confess my sin, to ring up the counsellor, to turn up to church on the regular, even though I'm wrestling through whatever it may be? Do I trust you that your invitation is going to lead me to a life of love and joy and peace and hope? And I can't answer that for you, but I can just stand here as just a pilgrim on that same journey saying, I know that's a big moment, but let's trust him. Let's choose to trust him. And maybe that looks like signing up for the Practicing the Way course rather than being on the fringes. Like, yeah, I want to get in. Like, I can't overstay. This is a moment for you to once more say, I want my life to be orientated around Jesus' way. I want to be known as a disciple of Jesus so that eventually I can be known as a person who lived a life of love. Amen. Let's stand together and pray. Invite the Holy Spirit to come.